He dragged her across the room for his mistress, but the moment she screamed one word, the entire world shifted. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Tasha Morgan walked through the marble halls of her husband's mansion, heels clicking softly against the polished floors. The crystal chandeliers above refracted light like fractured stars, but she barely noticed. Luxury surrounded her, yet it had always felt like a gilded cage. Every room, every decoration, every carefully curated artwork seemed to remind her of the life she lived not by choice, but by circumstance. She paused in front of a full-length mirror, brushing a strand of hair from her face. On the surface, she was flawless, poised, elegant, and composed. Yet beneath the perfection was a simmering tension, a quiet strength forged from years of maintaining dignity under scrutiny and control. Tasha had learned early that survival in this world required vigilance, patience, and emotional armor. The billionaire who claimed her as his wife, Adrian Blackwell, was a man of immense power and exacting standards. In public, he was charming, commanding, and revered. Behind closed doors, however, he wielded wealth as a weapon, his moods unpredictable, his temper dangerous. Tasha had endured verbal jabs, subtle manipulations, and the occasional lash of cruelty, each instance leaving marks that never fully healed. Her day had begun like any other, a carefully orchestrated routine designed to minimize conflict, placate her husband, and maintain appearances. Yet today, an underlying tension had settled like a storm cloud over the mansion. Adrian had been distant all morning, his gaze sharp, his words clipped. Something in the air hinted at volatility, a danger she had learned to anticipate. Tasha's thoughts drifted to her friends and family, the ones who didn't live in palatial cages or navigate constant judgment. She longed for freedom, for autonomy, for the simple right to exist without scrutiny or fear. But she had learned that speaking out, even softly, could ignite wrath. So she moved with grace, measured her words, and concealed every flicker of frustration beneath a calm exterior. As she entered the drawing room, she noticed Adrian on the phone, his voice low and urgent. He hung up abruptly, eyes narrowing at her presence. "Tasha," he said, tone deceptively casual, "come here." She approached, heart steady yet tense. Every step was careful, calculated, a dance she had performed countless times. She knew from experience that one misstep could provoke anger, humiliation, or worse. Before she could speak, a subtle shift occurred in Adrian's posture. His expression hardened, eyes glinting with impatience. Something in his stance foreshadowed the storm that was about to erupt. Tasha's pulse quickened, not with fear alone, but with a quiet, simmering resolve she had cultivated over years of enduring indignity. She knew, in the depths of her being, that today might demand more than composure, it might demand courage. In the opulent silence, the tension stretched taut. The chandeliers reflected the room in fractured light, mirroring the fractured balance of power, control, and suppressed emotion that defined her life. Tasha inhaled deeply, steadying herself for whatever was coming. She would meet it with the dignity and strength that had carried her through countless trials. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every heartbeat sound like a drum. Adrian stood near the velvet sofa, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on Tasha with a possessive glare that had always unnerved her. Across the room, his mistress lingered, a calculated smirk playing on her lips. The tension was electric, dangerous, a volatile mix of humiliation, control, and raw ego. Tasha's pulse raced. She had anticipated anger, even verbal cruelty, but nothing prepared her for what happened next. Adrian stepped forward suddenly, seizing her by the arm. Before she could react, he yanked her toward the center of the room, and his grip tightened in her hair. Pain flared as she stumbled, helpless under the force of his dominance, every ounce of dignity threatened. The mistress's laughter sliced through the room, sharp and malicious. "She's so fragile," she whispered, reveling in the spectacle. Tasha's teeth clenched, but words caught in her throat. Fear, humiliation, and outrage collided inside her, A storm she had kept at bay for years now breaking against the walls of control. Then it happened. One word escaped her lips, raw and deliberate. A scream of defiance, not desperation. Stop. The room seemed to freeze. The sound reverberated off the walls, a tremor that disrupted the balance of power. Adrian's grip faltered, shock flickering in his eyes as the word carried the weight of courage, dignity, and refusal. The mistress recoiled, taken aback by the unexpected assertion. Tasha's voice, though trembling, held a firmness that demanded attention and respect. Time slowed. Tasha straightened her posture, meeting Adrian's gaze directly. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by something far more potent: resilience. The one word had shifted the dynamics instantly. No longer a passive victim, she had reclaimed a fragment of control, asserting her worth and humanity in a single, piercing sound. Adrian's expression flickered between rage, surprise, and something he had rarely experienced: hesitation. He had wielded power for years without challenge, but this defiance unsettled him. For the first time, he had to confront the fact that wealth and authority could not compel submission when met with courage and moral clarity. Tasha's breath came in sharp, measured bursts. Her arms were tense, her mind racing with the adrenaline of confrontation and the weight of years spent suppressing indignity. She did not falter further, she did not beg or justify. She simply stood, one word having forged a shield of strength she had not realized she still possessed. The mistress's presence, once dominating, now seemed inconsequential. Her smirk faded as she studied Tasha, recognizing a force that could not be undermined by manipulation or ridicule. Power had shifted in a single moment. One syllable had cracked the veneer of control, exposing vulnerability, strength, and resolve simultaneously. Adrian took a step back, his posture rigid, the room's air thick with tension. Tasha's gaze remained unwavering, fierce yet measured. The scream was more than a plea, it was a declaration. She would no longer be passive. She would no longer tolerate humiliation, and she would not be diminished by betrayal or cruelty. The collision of fear and courage, dominance and defiance, had transformed the space. A silent reckoning began. Tasha had demonstrated that strength could emerge from vulnerability, that dignity could persist in the face of abuse, and that one voice, resolute and unbroken, could alter the course of events. In the stillness that followed, Tasha's chest heaved with adrenaline. She met Adrian's eyes once more, unflinching. "I am not yours to control," she said quietly but with unmistakable clarity. The weight of those words hung between them, echoing with consequences he could not ignore. The mistress shifted uncomfortably, realizing the spectacle she had intended to exploit had backfired. Power had been challenged and exposed, leaving a path for Tasha to assert herself and for the story to move toward reckoning, justice, and eventual transformation. Tasha sat alone in her bedroom, the heavy drapes drawn against the afternoon sun. Her hair still ached from the violent tug, her shoulders stiff from the humiliation she had endured moments ago. Yet beneath the physical discomfort was a fire she had not felt in years, an awareness that she could no longer remain passive. The scream, the single word that had shattered the immediate control, had sparked a realization: fear was not her only option. Adrian lingered elsewhere in the mansion, his thoughts unsettled. He was accustomed to compliance, to obedience that never questioned authority or status. But Tasha's defiance had been immediate, undeniable, and unnerving. The rage that usually accompanied his sense of power was now tinged with confusion. He could not understand why one word could disrupt the dynamic he had so carefully maintained. Over the next few days, Tasha moved with cautious determination. She carried herself with the same elegance as before, but every gesture, every glance, was infused with a subtle assertion of agency. She answered Adrian's questions with composure yet introduced boundaries he had never experienced from her before. She allowed her intelligence and intuition to guide interactions, subtly challenging his assumptions without overt confrontation. Adrian, for his part, was caught in a new struggle. He had always equated power with control, influence with compliance. But Tasha's newfound assertiveness revealed cracks in his perception. Her strength forced him to reckon with the idea that authority could not compel respect and that wealth could not suppress courage. For the first time, he questioned his methods, his behavior, and the consequences of his arrogance. Even within the intimate spaces of the mansion, tension simmered. Every room became a stage for subtle battles of dominance and restraint. Tasha refused to be intimidated by glances, gestures, or insinuations. Her one-word scream had been a spark, but her continued resistance became a shield, a quiet assertion that she would not be reduced by cruelty or betrayal. At dinner one evening, Adrian leaned across the table, attempting to assert his habitual control. "You've changed your tone," he said, voice measured, but with an edge that hinted at frustration. "I've only chosen to speak clearly," Tasha replied, her gaze steady. "I will not be silenced by fear, humiliation, or manipulation." The words landed with weight. Adrian's jaw tightened. His ego bristled at the challenge, yet something deeper stirred, recognition, perhaps even a begrudging respect for the courage she displayed. He had underestimated her, and the realization unsettled him more than he expected. Tasha, meanwhile, found subtle joy in the reclamation of her autonomy. She moved through her daily life with a careful mix of vigilance and quiet rebellion. Simple acts, asserting opinions, refusing unnecessary subservience, establishing boundaries, were victories in themselves. Each small act reinforced her inner strength, a reminder that she could resist without inciting unnecessary danger, that courage need not be reckless to be effective. The mansion, once a symbol of oppression and fear, now carried undercurrents of negotiation and equilibrium. Adrian's attempts to dominate were met with subtle countermeasures: controlled speech, calm gestures, and unwavering eye contact. Tasha's resistance was strategic, grounded in intelligence and emotional fortitude rather than impulse. For Adrian, the resistance was disorienting. He found himself both frustrated and fascinated, drawn to her strength even as it challenged every assumption he had ever held about power, obedience, and desire. The dynamics of control were shifting, and he was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that Tasha could not be commanded or diminished. By the end of the week, a new rhythm had begun to take shape, a tense, fragile balance of power and recognition. Tasha had asserted herself without breaking, and Adrian had been forced to acknowledge that his authority was not absolute. The resistance was not only a survival tactic, it was the beginning of a profound transformation that would alter both their lives. A week later, the mansion was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that carried both expectation and unease. Tasha had been summoned to a meeting Adrian insisted on holding in the private study. She knew what it meant: proximity, confrontation, and the subtle psychological tug-of-war that had defined much of their relationship. As she entered, Adrian rose from behind his massive mahogany desk, the air charged with authority and anticipation. His gaze tracked her, not with aggression this time, but with measured scrutiny. He had not anticipated the quiet strength she had cultivated in the past days, strength that now seemed to fill the space, defying his usual control. "You're here," he said, voice low, almost neutral. It was a statement, not a question. "I am," Tasha replied, her tone calm but firm. She set herself deliberately in the center of the room, arms relaxed, posture controlled. She would not shrink, and she would not flinch. Adrian gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit," he instructed, though the formality had softened, as if he recognized the stakes had changed. Tasha complied, maintaining eye contact. Every movement was intentional, deliberate, measured, a silent assertion of agency. She had learned over the past week that control could be claimed without overt aggression, that strength could manifest quietly yet unmistakably. The conversation began with pretense, discussion of household management and minor logistical concerns, but quickly shifted. Adrian tested her limits subtly, his questions probing, his words layered with expectation and veiled challenge. "You've been different," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Firm. Unyielding. I didn't expect it." Tasha's lips curved in the faintest smile, a shadow of pride threading her expression. "I've been surviving," she replied softly. "I've realized that tolerating injustice silently is not strength. Speaking, asserting, drawing lines, that is strength. Adrian absorbed the statement, the edge of surprise evident. He had underestimated her resilience, and the realization unsettled him. His usual dominance, refined over years of control and compliance, now encountered a boundary he could not breach. For the next hour, the dialogue shifted fluidly between negotiation, subtle challenge, and measured observation. Tasha demonstrated intellect, poise, and clarity in response to his tests. Adrian's fascination grew, not in possession or power, but in recognition of her capacity to think, assert, and maintain dignity under pressure. A brief interruption occurred when the door opened, and a staff member delivered documents. Tasha took the papers in one hand while keeping her posture unbroken, seamlessly managing both task and presence. Adrian watched quietly, impressed by the efficiency and composure she displayed. It was a small but telling moment, proof of her adaptability, resilience, and capacity to thrive under scrutiny. At the conclusion of the meeting, Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in contemplation. "You forced me to reassess assumptions," he said slowly. "Not everyone can do that." Tasha met his gaze steadily. "And not everyone can lead without understanding the consequences of their actions," she replied. The subtle reminder hung in the air, clear yet measured, asserting power without confrontation. As she left the study, the tension had not vanished, it had transformed. What had been conflict-laden proximity was now a carefully balanced connection. Adrian's authority was acknowledged, but her strength had been recognized. Their interactions now carried complexity, respect, recognition, subtle admiration, and the quiet pull of unresolved tension. Walking down the hall, Tasha felt a new sense of agency. The forced proximity had revealed not just his capacity for observation but her own ability to assert boundaries while navigating danger. She had taken the first deliberate step toward reclaiming control in a relationship long defined by intimidation and manipulation. Adrian remained in the study, watching her leave. He realized that the dynamics had shifted permanently. Resistance was not defiance to be punished but strength to be reckoned with. His fascination, previously tangled with desire and ego, now mingled with respect and an acknowledgement that Tasha was not simply a figure to control, she was a force to understand and navigate. Have you ever been forced into a situation with someone challenging, only to discover strength you didn't know you had? How did it change your relationship with them? Share your story in the comments. The evening air in the mansion was thick with unease. Tasha sat in the grand sitting room, arms crossed over her chest, eyes fixed on the fireplace that did little to warm her trembling resolve. Adrian entered silently, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. He was composed, yet the tension radiating from him was unmistakable. Tonight, the fragile equilibrium they had maintained would shatter. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked, voice low, a dangerous edge beneath the calm. His words were precise, controlled, but the room seemed to vibrate with unspoken threat. Tasha lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I've done nothing but reclaim my voice," she replied, each word deliberate. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests of the chair, steadying herself against the adrenaline coursing through her. She would not shrink, not now. Adrian's expression flickered, rage, disbelief, and something unspoken warred in his eyes. He had never encountered resistance like this, measured, unwavering, and compelling. The audacity of her defiance unsettled him more than any argument or manipulation ever had. The tension escalated when the mistress appeared at the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips. She had intended to provoke, to assert dominance through humiliation. Instead, she found herself confronted by Tasha's calm authority. "You will leave," Tasha said, voice steady and commanding. The single word carried power, an echo of the scream that had ignited her courage days earlier. It was no longer desperation, it was assertion. Adrian froze, caught between instinctive control and the new reality that Tasha was no longer pliable. The mistress, realizing her position had shifted, hesitated, then withdrew silently. Power dynamics had inverted with a single declaration. Tasha's courage had redefined the room. The breaking point deepened as Adrian attempted to regain composure. You think this changes anything? He demanded, voice rising slightly. It changes everything, Tasha replied firmly. I will not be treated as a subordinate, a spectacle, or a prize. I am not yours to control. The weight of her words hit him. Years of dominance, control, and entitlement collided with a truth he had never fully confronted. Tasha was autonomous, resilient, and unshakable. His authority could no longer dictate the terms of her existence. For Tasha, the culmination of fear, humiliation, and suppressed strength coalesced into clarity. She realized that empowerment required not only courage but decisive action. Remaining passive or appeasing would continue the cycle of subjugation. Tonight, she would assert herself fully, not with vengeance, but with unyielding dignity. Adrian took a step back, the tension in his posture betraying his internal reckoning. He had underestimated her, and the consequences of that miscalculation now became undeniable. Every measured glance, every controlled gesture from Tasha reminded him that his power was no longer absolute. The room fell into tense silence. Tasha's breathing was steady, calm but charged with resolve. She had reclaimed her space, her voice, and her authority. The mistress, sidelined and powerless, watched silently while Adrian processed the irreversible shift. In that moment, a subtle but profound transformation occurred. The breaking point was not a collapse of either party but a confrontation with truth. Tasha had faced the apex of fear, humiliation, and danger, and emerged empowered, unyielding, and fully aware of her own strength. As Adrian retreated to the study, the weight of accountability settled heavily upon him. Tasha remained standing, poised, eyes clear and unwavering. The breaking point had passed, but the ramifications rippled outward, setting the stage for choices, reckoning, and eventual resolution. Later that night, Tasha sat in the quiet of her bedroom, Noah asleep in the adjoining room. The mansion was dark and still, the silence stretching between walls that had witnessed both privilege and cruelty. Her mind replayed the confrontation, Adrian's volatile presence, and the unmistakable strength she had summoned. Each memory carried weight, fear, humiliation, defiance, and now, a glimmer of liberation. She traced the edge of her bedside table, grounding herself in the tactile reality of her space. Choices lay before her: retreat into fear and compliance, maintain the fragile peace that had long defined her life, or confront the situation fully, assert boundaries, reclaim autonomy, and demand respect. Courage, once dormant, whispered insistently that the latter path was not only necessary but inevitable. Across the mansion, Adrian sat in the study, city lights reflecting in the glass behind him. His usual composure was tempered by uncertainty. The events of the evening had forced a reckoning. Tasha's courage was real, undeniable, and destabilizing. He had always equated dominance with control, compliance with success. Now, he confronted a truth he had long avoided, that power alone could not dictate respect, nor could wealth suppress autonomy when met with inner strength. He considered options: assert control again and risk irreparable damage, withdraw entirely and allow distance to grow, or recognize her strength and adjust his approach. The choice was not just about authority, it was about the future of their relationship, the possibility of redemption, and the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The decision crystallized when Tasha entered the study, standing with measured confidence. Adrian rose slightly, sensing the shift in her energy. She approached, gaze steady, hands relaxed at her sides, a posture that spoke of courage, dignity, and quiet command. "I will not tolerate humiliation or violence," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. "I am asserting my boundaries, and I expect them to be respected. This is the choice I make for myself, for my dignity, and for the life I intend to lead." Adrian absorbed the words, every syllable striking with clarity. For the first time, he understood that authority without respect was meaningless. He could exert power, but she could not be broken. The choice was his as well: resist change, or embrace the opportunity to confront his behavior, acknowledge harm, and act differently. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. "I hear you," he said softly, voice measured, "and I will act accordingly." I recognize the truth of your words, and I cannot ignore them. Tasha nodded, sensing a subtle shift. Recognition, accountability, and an openness to transformation now existed where only fear and domination had previously reigned. The choice had been made, not by chance, circumstance, or coercion, but through courage, clarity, and the deliberate assertion of agency. Over the next few moments, the mansion felt different. Air that had carried tension now seemed lighter, infused with the quiet potential of mutual acknowledgement. Tasha had reclaimed her power, Adrian had confronted his behavior, and the possibility of a new dynamic, grounded in respect rather than fear, emerged. This was the turning point. Both had faced choices that demanded courage, introspection, and honesty. Tasha's decision to assert herself had defined the terms. Adrian's willingness to listen, reflect, and adjust marked the beginning of accountability. Together, the choices formed a bridge, a fragile but real path toward reconciliation, understanding, and transformation. The night stretched quietly, each breathing moment reinforcing the gravity and significance of the decisions made. Fear had been confronted, power had been recalibrated, and for the first time, the possibility of mutual respect and empowerment felt tangible. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across the study where Tasha stood. The mansion, once heavy with tension, now felt open, almost fragile, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the shift in power, respect, and understanding. Noah's laughter echoed from the adjoining room, a reminder of life, resilience, and the stakes that had always driven her courage. Adrian entered quietly, his usual commanding presence softened by awareness. He no longer approached with arrogance or expectation, but with measured respect, recognition, and a newfound understanding of Tasha's strength. The violent dynamic that had defined their past had dissolved into something fragile yet powerful: acknowledgement of wrongs, accountability, and mutual clarity. "You spoke with courage last night," Adrian said, voice calm, almost reverent. "And I realized that my control was never respect. It was fear. I see that now." Tasha held his gaze, unwavering. "Respect cannot be commanded," she replied firmly. "It must be earned, acknowledged, and reciprocated. I will no longer tolerate cruelty or humiliation, but I can recognize accountability and change." He nodded, the weight of truth settling heavily on him. The room was quiet, but in that silence, the transformation was palpable. They had faced the breaking point, made conscious choices, and emerged on the other side, not unscarred, but empowered, aware, and fundamentally changed. The day moved forward, and with it, subtle signs of reconciliation unfolded. Adrian deferred to Tasha's decisions in matters both domestic and personal, engaging with her not as a ruler over her life but as a partner seeking balance and understanding. Tasha, for her part, maintained dignity, authority, and composure, navigating the dynamic with intelligence and confidence. Later, on the terrace overlooking the city skyline, Tasha and Adrian stood side by side, the early afternoon sun reflecting the clarity and resolve in their expressions. Noah ran between them, carefree and joyful, the embodiment of hope and continuity. Tasha's hand rested lightly on Adrian's arm, a gesture of cautious connection, tempered by recognition of past harm and current strength. "Change is not easy," Adrian said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But I understand now that it is necessary, if I am to respect you and us." Tasha's lips curved in a faint, measured smile. "Acknowledgement is only the first step," she said. "Action, accountability, and courage are what build trust." He exhaled, a long, deliberate release of tension. "Then let our actions speak from now on," he said. The mansion, once oppressive, now resonated with possibility. Each space carried echoes of confrontation, courage, and choice, but also of recognition, accountability, and renewed potential. Tasha had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her dignity. Adrian had faced the consequences of power misused and learned that true authority rests on respect, empathy, and understanding. By evening, a quiet dinner brought a moment of intimacy without pretense or threat. Adrian engaged with Noah gently, genuinely, while Tasha observed with relief and satisfaction. The dynamics of the household had shifted permanently. Fear had been replaced with measured trust, control with collaboration, and tension with acknowledgement of autonomy. Finally, standing together on the terrace as night settled, Tasha looked at the skyline, reflecting on the journey from humiliation and danger to empowerment and recognition. Adrian placed a hand lightly on hers, a subtle but profound affirmation of partnership. "You have shown me courage I underestimated," he said softly, "and I will not squander that insight again." Tasha's eyes glimmered. "And you've shown me that acknowledgement and accountability matter, that change is possible if one is willing to confront themselves." They embraced, a measured, deliberate hold, infused with understanding, recognition, and the quiet triumph of empowerment. The path forward would not be without challenge, but for the first time, the foundation was built on dignity, respect, and mutual awareness. Noah ran between them, giggling as the city lights began to shimmer. Tasha laughed freely, unburdened, feeling a sense of completeness she had long been denied. The scream that had once been born of defiance had transformed into a symbol of power reclaimed, a life redefined, and a future shaped by choice. Have you ever faced injustice or cruelty and found the courage to assert your strength? How did reclaiming your power change your life or relationships? Share your story in the comments. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.